Today on Overwatch This, the long-awaited Symmetra changes are finally here, and we discuss the cancellation of the Overwatch graphic novel. Hello everybody and welcome to Overwatch This episode 9. It's Joel with Ben.
Hello.
And we have got a couple of things to talk about today, starting with some changes on the PTR. So, PTR's back up, and the biggest thing comfortably to talk about is Symmetra.
Yep, she's arrived in her new form.
It's only taken 7 weeks since we discussed it in excruciating depth.
They've only been talking about it roughly for,
and now it's on the PTR. So yeah, big old changes to Symmetra.
Yeah, she's not been completely redesigned. Like if you've played her before, her moment to moment running around, putting down turrets, left clicking on people until they fall over with your microwave, that's not completely changed. There's basically a large number of quality of life stuff. Like she now spawns with 6 turrets, so you don't have to kind of panic going, oh, I need to get these down as fast as possible so that the cooldown starts, so that I can have more up before the enemy spawns. And there's also there's a little bit of extra range on her gun that we'll discuss properly in a minute or two. But the two major big things are they added a new ability. They took away her passive shield generation because it was boring. You just click on a bunch of people when the match starts, and then you click on them again if they ever die, and it gave very small benefit.
It's quite boring.
Yeah, and originally in the beta, I think I don't think this made it into live, or if it did, it was one of the first patches changed it. She gave 50 shields, which was actually a lot. That upped a character like Tracer's health by a fifth, or a character like Zenyatta by even more than that, right? Particularly back then when he had an even smaller health pool. So. But they nerfed that down to 25 because it was too strong. It made the team really resilient to damage and that sort of thing, and that just meant that it just felt anemic. It did something, and it was probably having an effect on the game, but you could not tell what it was.
Yeah, that's the trouble, isn't it?
You know, if you crunched all the numbers and you had perfect perception, I'm sure you would go, oh wow, that's having a pretty big effect on this game.
As a player, you don't want to have to look
at
that level of detail to
you
feel
don't
like you're doing something. It removes you from the action in a way, so it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So they killed that completely. She no longer gives shields to allies except with her new ultimate, which again we'll talk about in a second. But she can now fire out this photon shield, this beam, this particle shield that just blocks all damage that hits it. You can't stop it moving. It keeps continuing forever.
It reminded me of that. I don't know if you've seen the first Resident Evil film.
The wall of lasers.
Yes, that's exactly right. It reminded me a bit of that in that it just continues on its way until it stops, and that's it. And yeah, obviously opposite, and it doesn't cut things apart. But
sadly, it doesn't. I think that would probably be a tad.
That bit in that film freaked me out because he's standing still, and you realise that he's actually been cut, and then his face slides off.
That was Equilibrium as well, which I watched at the weekend.
So that's the Christian Bale thing.
Yeah,
I really like that film.
I'd forgotten about his child, who is just the worst character.
Oh, I've forgotten. It's been a while since I watched that.
Anyway, that's definitely not
it's a slight digression. Anyway, she's got a cool moving shield thing.
Yeah, that's not anything like Equilibrium or the first Resident Evil movie.
It is a little bit.
And yeah, so that's kind of like a Reinhardt shield. It seems to take quite a lot of punishment. Obviously, the numbers are probably going to be tweaked. Even if they landed in a good place, whether they're too low or too high. The point of the PTR is to tweak these sorts of numbers. So yeah, it can take quite a lot of punishment, but it moves forever. So you're not going to block a passage with it for very long. You can block it for as long as it takes for it to get to where the enemy is.
And it's not super wide. So
no, it
only defends you from one front, basically.
Yeah, it's not like a big curve or anything like that. It also it's a bit smaller than Reinhardt's shield overall.
Yeah, it definitely looks smaller.
Basically, she's not a replacement for Reinhardt. Reinhardt's probably still going to be one of the best characters in the game for defending a point, but it does give her more options. It's a super interesting ability. If you use it at the wrong time, it's useless. If you use it at the right time, it can it'll save your team. If you can put it out just as somebody starts to use their ultimate, it's going to it'll stop that at least for a little bit, even if it's a really high damaging ultimate, and that could be just enough time for your team to get coordinated.
It's all a question of timing, isn't it? Because of its constant movement, you're going to have to learn when to deploy it for it to be sort of maximally effective.
It is pretty bugged at the moment, as you'll see in our video and a number of other videos going around the internet. If you fire them into the air, they don't ever go away.
That's funny.
They just go forever, and then they start taking damage from the out of bounds kind of kill triggers.
Oh, that's
and
really
start
funny.
making a noise. and then if you fire like 50 of them, the noise ramps up over time and just becomes this juddering insanity.
That's great.
So if you want to hear that, I did turn it down slightly in the video that I put on the PCGamesN YouTube channel. But yeah, do take a look at that. So obviously all of that will need to be fixed. I assume it's just a matter of giving them a lifetime of like 10 seconds. The cooldown's 10 seconds.
If hits world barrier go
just
away,
can you leave?
Doesn't sound that complicated.
But yeah, like that is actually going to affect normal play. It's just annoying if people try to troll each other. There's also a way to make it just hang in place forever, which is obviously a problem given that's not meant to. Yeah, that's meant to be its big kind of weakness is that it doesn't do that. So there's bugs like that to work out. But once it is working, I'm really interested to see how people get along with it.
And she's got a second ult now, which is, quite a thing.
Yeah, and so this is the first character with like a second ult. So, I mean, there is characters like D.Va who have two, but one of them is just kind of what you get to do after you did the other one.
Yeah, it's an extension of the first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's all kind of one system that is connected together. Whereas this is, when you build your ultimate, you can either put down a teleporter that she used to have that they haven't gotten rid of, which I think is the correct decision. That's interesting, and it's unique. Like, no one else can move characters around the map like that. And it is exceedingly powerful in exactly the right circumstance, which is why they're changing her, because she was really good in that one thing where you're defending the first point on Anubis or something like that, but then wasn't very good later. So you can still do that, or you can put down the shield generator, which gives 75 shields to everyone in like a fairly large AoE around it. Now, like we were saying earlier, 50 shields was determined to be overpowered when she could do that from like the start of the game. So 75 is quite a lot. I assume it will run out at some point, like it'll have a lifespan on it. It can also be killed if the enemy can find it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to, like, you don't have to be able to see it, so you can hide it in a building the same way you do a teleporter or whatever.
Sure.
But yeah, that's really strong. And I can imagine she's probably now in a position like with Torbjorn or with Bastion, where those characters are very difficult to deal with if you have an uncoordinated team or if you're a new player, because like the entire enemy team's got 75 more health that regenerates and like lets them do stuff and like lets them be a lot more resilient, and that's pretty much what the game is all about.
Is it everyone in that area or a maximum of like 3 people?
No, it's everyone. It's your whole team. So yeah, it's her.
That is pretty powerful.
And it's her 5 teammates.
Okay.
So I'm really interested to see how that goes. I think that might be toned down or altered in some way. I don't know if it's overpowered in like proper play. I expect it's not particularly great. It's pretty good, but not amazing. But I expect that for lower tier players, in the same way that the teleporter was quite annoying because it just made the enemy team, always be pretty much a 6.
Yeah.
If you couldn't go and find it and you weren't very good at flanking and that sort of thing. I think at them adding another character that is like that, like Torbjorn or Bastion, where it just kind of kills people that aren't paying enough attention, could be quite annoying for lower level players. And obviously, like, those people aren't what you should balance the game around, but you need to have some sort of...
No, but they are probably the majority. Cause
exactly.
That's just the way it works with these things.
Particularly given it's such a massive console game, and it's harder to aim on console, it's harder to move around on console and that sort of thing. So... I can imagine a situation where that maybe gets toned down a bit, or maybe the numbers are already in a place where the AoE on it isn't quite large enough that it's as devastating as like a Bastion and a Torbjorn trying to defend 1 point and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the range buff to her primary fire thing you've described here as scary.
Yeah,
Ben is scared.
The reason this is scary, so obviously it's like quite a small change, and it's a good quality of life change where it means you can just kind of keep damaging them for a larger amount of time. But it's gone from 5 meters to 7 meters, which is a buff of like 50%.
Nearly 50%.
Yeah, exactly. And also her gun does like real damage. Like it deals a little bit of damage and then it charges up over time. And once it's fully charged up, it does a serious like amount of punishment, and it will cut through people, particularly like lower health characters, like flanking characters that are going to be trying to come and get her teleporter or her shield generator down. This is the bit where I'm worried that they might have just thought, oh, we'll just buff this and it'll be fine.
Right.
And it may be the bit that maybe tips her over the edge.
Yeah.
There are already situations where if like a bunch of people kind of run at her and she's good at like targeting the lower health ones down first, and maybe those other guys aren't aiming particularly well, that she can like cut through like 3 or 4 people really, really quickly. So with this, like, people aren't going to be able to get as way as easily. That means that she has more time to charge her gun on them.
Yeah,
upping her damage even further, which means that she's going to kill people faster. So I'm really interested to see how this goes. Like, it's scary in that I can imagine it may need to be brought back or buffed in a different way.
That is a big jump in it, 5 to 7 meters.
Yeah, exactly.
It does seem a lot.
It's one of those things where if you're not like playing the game that much, or if you just see it like in a patch note, you're just like, oh, okay, fine, whatever. But I think in practical play, it might prove to be one of the more impactful changes they made.
Yeah. So I mean, as all of that sort of alludes to, it's probable that this won't necessarily come out of PTR for a bit because of all the need for balancing. And the PTR went up, yes, it's Wednesday as we record this, as it is every week. PTR went up yesterday on Tuesday evening UK time. So it may be a while, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so 1.5 only just came out. Like, that was last week.
It was last
that
week,
was the Sombra patch, and one of the biggest patches in the game so far. This patch, like, it doesn't have anything as big as Sombra, but the changes to Symmetra are much larger than any of the changes they made to other characters in that patch. So I would say like 1.6 so far is like maybe half the size of 1.5, and they still have other stuff they want to add to it.
Yeah.
They talked about, in a developer update, they talked about Oasis, which is the new map they want to add.
Yeah.
They haven't added a proper new map for a little bit, like the last one was Action World.
It's been a while, yeah.
Yeah. So all of that together would suggest to me that it's going to be a little while before this goes to live. It means they've got plenty of time to test the Symmetra changes. It could prove that she is just like mad OP, or that the changes aren't enough and she's still just kind of useless outside of a couple of really specific niches. But also, they haven't yet even added Oasis to the PTR. They said it was going to be really soon after Symmetra. I think what they're trying to do is have moments of focus. So right now, everyone's jumping on. There will be 2 Symmetras in every game that has the character limit. There'll be 6v6 Symmetras going on all the time in the non-character limit mode, which is great for testing bugs, right?
So weird.
Yeah, like there's no kind of balance testing going on there, but they'll find bugs like the ones that we've already seen. And yeah, there's going to be 2 Symmetras in every single game. People will be working out whether she's good on attack now, how the photon shield like affects that, because obviously that can actually be used offensively where you charge in after it.
Yeah.
Particularly with like a Lucio speed buff or that kind of thing. So people are now testing that. In a couple of days or maybe next week, they'll add Oasis. Loads of people, like everyone will then go and play on that map.
Yeah,
that's all they'll want to play. They'll probably add some sort of thing where you can get automatically match made just onto that map.
Right.
Because obviously that's what they want as well.
Yeah,
they want people to find like, what the problems with that map is.
Like that.
So there's still that to come. We also know that at some point we're going to get winter skins. Like we were talking about, we expect those to be on December 1st. So it's not like there's going to be some kind of lull in content being brought to the live game.
Yeah.
So with all of that together, and they've said also that Oasis isn't meant to come out until early next year.
Right.
Which I think says to me, 1.6 won't be until they'll basically set some stuff up to be tested over the Christmas period.
And they'll have to roll the skins out though.
Yeah, and the skins I think aren't going to go through a testing period.
Right.
They're just going to show up on the live servers next week in a couple of weeks, something like that.
Yeah, it'll have to be that, won't it? Really.
So yeah, that's how I see it for the next month or so. I could be completely wrong. All of this could go live next week.
This is true.
And then they'll bring Symmetra off the PTR and put Oasis up separately. But yeah, I think we're not going to see these changes go live until 2 weeks into January, 3 weeks into January, something like that.
Okay, so the other thing we've got to discuss today is the Overwatch graphic novel, which we've talked about a bit before BlizzCon, speculating that it would be there. Then after BlizzCon, wondering why it wasn't. Now we sort of know why it wasn't, because it's dead.
It's dead that they've killed it. It's on the floor.
They have killed it, which I was actually really surprised about.
Because
it felt like such a natural fit for the game. It felt like if, they were going to be able to make it work, because they're really good at stuff like that. I was just really taken aback. This happened Friday night. Friday evening.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah, it was Friday evening. So it's well, what are we thinking? Like, what were they thinking?
It is super strange. Like, even if you just look at Blizzard as a company and think about how often they've announced something and cancelled it, it's happened 2.5 times over the course of their entire life, or at least certainly since they became a company people were paying attention to, right? Happened with Lord of the Clans, which was this adventure game that they were
that's
making.
the one I couldn't think of, yeah.
And with StarCraft Ghost.
And then
there's Project Titan, which they never properly announced, but people knew about just because it was such a massive project. Those are the only times that has happened. The Warcraft movie happened eventually. It took like a long time, right? Whenever they say, "Hey, we're going to do this book," it usually comes out, whether people actually care about it or not. Like, it does actually happen. They release so much tangential stuff to their universes. Like, there's a World of Warcraft cookbook this year. Like, they just make tat. It's they're a tat
got a cupboard full of a lot of it, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I own a lot of it because I think it's cool, and like. I think it's cool because a lot of their fans think it's cool, and this stuff does sell. Yeah. This graphic novel would have sold.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It probably would have been one of the better selling graphic novels of the year because it has an interest base of 20 plus million. I think part of the reason it was cancelled is because like graphic novel, like who buys graphic novels. It's just a small audience,
yes,
compared to the other stuff they're doing.
True, but I just think because of the format of the game and thus how they have to deliver its narrative and the surrounding universe to it, what we've seen with the animated shorts and stuff, it felt like this was such a natural extension of all of that, and such a useful way of being able to tell a more in-depth story about the characters and the background and the universe all this is set in, which you can't get really in a multiplayer shooter. So it seemed like such a good fit. And they've come out and just said, we've got a couple of quotes here, we've ultimately decided to take the story in a different direction. While the core of this story remains, we've changed and expanded upon how we see the events that took place during the first days of Overwatch. That to me is quite a big thing to say. It's sort of like we've just changed our mind about the lore of the game, and obviously that's their prerogative, but it's, we're 7 months out from release, after the release. You sort of can't just go, no, we've changed it, or I don't know. I think it's really weird.
Well, that's what's interesting, right? Is that you couldn't do that in a normal game.
No,
in a standard box release, £35. Here you go. Here's an 8-hour single player. Obviously, you couldn't do it. There would be the 8-hour single player sitting there. But they sort of can, because of how they built the game. They made a very, very simplified, very basic product to start with. They said, here is a few maps. Here's some characters. That is it. That was always in the base game, and they've expanded on it since then. And I think in some way, they also at some point said, hey, okay, we're going to do the story like this. And then as the game has developed, for example, the number of players that they've got, the popularity of the animated shorts, they've gone, okay, we were planning on doing it this way, but that's no longer applicable to how the story's being told, and also what we can do with this, given how big it is. It just
sits uncomfortably with me that they've had this internal revision about the narrative and the lore, and no one outside the company has any visibility on A, what it was supposed to be, what direction this was going to go in, and B, what it is now. Because if we don't get this, what do we get instead? Because there's got to be exactly. There has to be a different delivery mechanism for the sort of thing they were going to inform the player base of using the graphic novel. So as you say, when will that happen, and what will it be? Will it be a load more animated shorts? Is there going to be a semi-feature length thing that they put out, like an hour-long internet-only movie? I don't know, but there has to be something.
Yeah, I mean, so there's two interesting points, right? There's what happened to it, so the really strange thing is I think it was finished. I think it's done. I think they have the file.
Totally bizarre.
And they could just send it to a publisher and get it. I mean, just send it to a publisher, because it was meant to come out this month.
Yeah.
That was the original release plan. Okay,
or even they were so far behind on it that they had to cancel
Possibly so, yeah. And maybe it got cancelled a year ago and they just kind of forgot to mention it until everyone brought it up at BlizzCon. But that just doesn't. That's not how a massive multinational corporation works. There is organisation in place there for it to function. This also comes after Chris Metzen leaves. There's also a guy called James Woe who's a little less known, but he was the guy that made sure stuff got published. He has also left. He became he's some vice president or president of some department at Lucasfilm. So it's not like he was fired. It sounds like he got a really good opportunity that he decided to go for. But when someone like that, who is in charge of exactly this sort of thing, goes, and then this gets cancelled.
The size of that company, you have a redundancy. He had a deputy or a assistant to, or something like that.
And in the past year, we've seen within Blizzard that a lot of these big guys, when they leave, there actually is just somebody waiting that can step up. So that is strange. What they replace it with, I mean, I think an Overwatch movie is inevitable, something that's massive, but also I think it's inevitable in it might not happen for 10 years way, particularly given, what we know about how long it takes Pixar to just render these kind of things. Yeah,
you'd have to, for a cinema release, blockbuster-ish movie, the game will have to have immense popularity for about 5 more years or something like that. Yeah. But what I could see, like I said, is some sort of hour-long extended TV show type thing that you can get on the internet with a limited release screening somewhere for fans. That could happen as well. But as you say, when do we get all this? I mean, the other thing that's possibly totally unrelated, but that we ran on the site yesterday, is there is this job posting for a new first-person based project thing, Now, some people are speculating this could be Overwatch expansion type something or other.
The single-player campaign that everybody wants, but nobody knows
or it could be something totally different. Yeah. But it's an interesting piece of timing, coincidence, if nothing else.
Yeah,
on Friday they cancel the Overwatch thing, and then on the Tuesday they publish a first-person.
Yeah, for a couple of jobs.
Yeah, like I don't know. Like I say, they could be totally unrelated.
It also comes like
could be grasping, but
a few days, a couple of weeks after they announced a guy had come in, like one of their co-founders had come back specifically to run new projects. All of this happening at once. It could be a coincidence. Like, this isn't an Illuminati thing.
Of course.
It could be a coincidence. But all of that points towards, hey, maybe there is something going on there.
It's just interesting. I mean, I haven't really seen, has there been like a huge outcry from the fan base about the graphic novel? Do people care?
I don't think so. People are kind of like, oh, that sucks. But they are assuming that something will come in its place. I mean, we'll get more free comics. That's for sure. Like, we've had them online. And, again, that just makes it even weirder because those have been... A, they've been good. B, they've been popular. And C, they look quite nice. Like, they've got artists that can draw characters in the world and make it look good and that sort of thing. And those stories have been interesting, a little short because they're like 10-page free comics online. So yeah, I will definitely get more of those because of this. Because, they were expecting to put out X amount of comic content. They've just removed a bunch of it. I expect they'll want to replace that with more, even if it isn't like a big paid for thing. But yeah, like people are sad about it, but they're not, there's no outcry. It's just like, oh, okay, that sucks, but I expect we'll get something better. And hopefully we will, I guess.
Yeah, hopefully. As you say, it's a question of what and a question of when, and even beyond that, like when they tell us what and when as well, because it's a communication thing. Once you cancel a thing that people sort of want, you sort of have to replace it with something else, even if that thing's further down the line.
Yeah, and I expect that over the next year, what they do will inform us as to what actually happened, like whether this was cancelled 12 months ago and they just didn't tell anybody, or whether they suddenly went, oh wait, we've got a way better idea. Especially if they then tell this story in a completely different way, we'll go, oh, okay, well that's obvious what happened. If they never tell this story, then maybe they did just decide, oh, okay, this just wasn't a good idea, wasn't well written.
Okay, that's it for this week. Join us again next week where we will be talking about more PTR changes, hopefully including new map Oasis, and hopefully also running down the winter skins.